do the laws get found when they don't know where to go? And I've been shaking. Not many more twists and turns before I find the road. And I've been hoping for sunrise. I heard the dawn of hope can even light the way.
Welcome to the Purpose Podcast with Dr. Jazz, where I'm your host, Dr. Jazz, and we journey to purpose together. On today's episode, I have with me Miss Grace Edwards. How are you?
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. This season, as Grace knows, and if you all who are not listening, you should subscribe also if you're listening to Grace episodes. So go ahead and subscribe. But this season, we're starting with the Collegiate series where I'm interviewing college students and just asking them about finding purpose, or do they know their purpose while in college? And then the end of the season is about people working in their occupations as their purpose. So today we have our fourth Collegiate episode with Miss Grace. So I'm going to introduce her and then and then we're going to get started. Grace L. Edwards is a current undergrad senior at the University of Pennsylvania, studying with the intention of pursuing medical school. She is drawn to conversations about identity, race, healthcare, and medicine, and often works in the intersection of these topics. She is a recently published co-author of Can You Help Me Give a Unlocking Teen Motivation in School and Life, which is now available for order on Amazon and EPUB. And that's it. Hello, Miss Grace.
Hi.
Thank you for being here. I looked up your book and I read like the first whatever was free. I'll be honest, I ain't buy it. I will buy it though. Just so you know, I will buy it. But I
Sure.
looked up whatever was free and it's like really motivational.
Yay, I'm glad.
Yeah. So we're going to get to the book later on in the conversation. But the first question is always, what does purpose mean to you?
Ah, it's such a loaded question. I think so. I think like what does purpose mean to me? I think it's sort of like a guiding light. It's something that you're always thinking back on
Mm,
is your sort of like why. But I think that why always changes. And I think maybe we don't have one specific why. I think we always have like several different whys like kind of floating around. That's what purpose means to me.
I like that you say that it's like a guiding light. Can you give me more about that if you have more? Like more about the guiding light. I think that's interesting. I've never heard anyone say that on this podcast.
Oh, yeah, I think of it as sort of like a what is it called? Like the tower that kind of
Okay.
like with the light that guides boats in the
Oh, the
sea. Yeah, that's sort
lighthouse.
of the lighthouse. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No,
It's a
you're fine.
morning. But yeah,
You're
like a
fine.
lighthouse. That's sort of what I think about. And I think about that in the context of because like you said in my bio, I am hoping to pursue med school. A lot of, we all know med school is very arduous and very hard to keep motivated, especially given that you're sort of like this in between. You're in school, but you're also working in the medical field, and you're dealing with a lot of different like systems in place that can be really hard for a 20 some to kind of navigate. So I think a lot of med students, they're always thinking and they're always telling me and they're always advising like other students to just like think about your why. But I think it's so broad. Like, how can you say
Mm,
that there's one why that you always fall back to? I think there should be multiple whys, and I think it should be vastly different for everyone. I think, especially in like med school, their why always seems to be like, I want to help people and I want to see
yeah,
myself in that
which is
position,
very
right?
broad.
So broad, right? And I try to think about something different and something unique because if I say I want to help people, well, I can help people in a lot of different ways. So what is specifically about medicine or what specifically about my why is unique to me and something that I can actually fall back to?
No, I love that. I love that you mentioned that because I've always thought that, but because I didn't go to medical school. I try not to, talk about the medicine people, but I've always been like, that's so generic. Like, I want to help. And a lot of them say that unless there's like a story attached, like my uncle died from cardiac arrest, or, like now I want to be a heart surgeon, or, something like that. It's usually just like I want to help people, which again is just so broad. So I'm glad
No
that someone
judgment,
else.
like, yeah,
No, oh
no
yeah,
judgment,
no
but like,
judgment.
Yeah,
But
but
you
it's
can
like,
do that in a myriad of ways. And I do think that a lot of people get to middle, not a lot, but people get to middle school and realize that's not the way, they want to do it, which is also an interesting journey. So
mhm.
yeah, so your purpose to you is like a lighthouse in the middle of the ocean, guiding you to safety, really, because that's what lighthouses do, avoid this place or that type of thing. I love that. And when you're talking about how it could be many different things, I'm reading your bio, right? You say you care about identity, race, healthcare, and medicine, which are all different, can be related, right? Because I'm a sociologist, so medical sociology is a thing, and like health determinants and all that kind of stuff, race determinants, all that stuff. So they can be related, but they also can be picked apart. So like
Yeah.
how did you do you talk about them in a related way? Are they picked apart for you? Like how does that even work when it comes to purpose in you?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it's a great question that I'm still figuring out.
And that's okay.
I am pretty open with the fact that I'm in therapy.
Hmm.
And I think that's like pretty common among Gen Z that we're pretty open about going to therapy. And one of my self-care tactics is like journaling. And I was actually just journaling about this the other day about like I don't know how I envision being able to sort of balance or do both. I know it's possible,
Hmm.
but it is difficult to be able to say these are two separate entities, two very different topics and like fields, and yet they exist in one person, and that's me. And that's like a really heavy thing to have to hold on to and navigate through college. And because I'm a senior, I'm thinking a lot about these things in terms of like long-term career goals. So it's a little bit difficult to kind of like hold on to that. But I still love it. There are ways in which I try to have them overlap. And then there are also, things that I do that make me realize that I actually can't really have them overlap. And so yeah, but I still love it. I still
Yeah.
love, I think what is really great about like these two particular like fields and like schools of thought is that the overlap is people and that we're dealing with people and we're dealing with the humanity of people. And I think that is sort of maybe where I fall because in terms of like having peace with um like being able to juggle these things these two things is acknowledging that people are at the center of it, um and if I can somehow be able to understand people and understand the humanity of people then and somehow treat them as they should be treated, then I think that helps me be able to, like I said, have peace with juggling these two things.
Yeah. So as I'm listening to you, I'm like, I'm about to change your whole career in my head. Like, you don't need to be no doctor. You need to be a researcher. You need to be a medical sociologist. Okay. So when you're applying to school, tell them that's your ultimate goal. No, but seriously, I really believe that those are the things that like draw me to sociology as people and the humanity of people. But I'm more about on the side sociology side, groups of people and like how we move as a society, not necessarily like the individual person, because I thought I was
Mhm.
going to be a therapist. Um, and going through life, I was like, girl, you do not care about people problems that much. Like, I just gotta be real with
Yeah.
yourself. Because I feel like
Yeah.
I was like, if somebody came to me and we had to work on the same problem for 3 years, my patience would be gone. I don't have that in me.
Mm, yeah.
Now I love therapy. Don't get me wrong. I've been in therapy 3 times. I love therapy for myself, but I could
Mhm.
not be because I even go to my therapist like, you ain't tired of talking about this. I've been talking about this for 3 months.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
can't.
Yeah.
But anyway, aside, I do believe that you might need to be a medical sociologist, but I'm not going to push you there. So I think that's unique though that you're in this space because it's good to be in a space that's open, as you're like learning and growing. And I feel like opportunities will come as you're open. And if you say, when I think about identity, or I care about race, or I care about healthcare, or I care about medicine, and I only care in these ways, you close off things. So I think that's dope that you're like like still trying to figure it out. And I want to say there's no pressure. You know what I'm saying? Like just
Appreciate
let
it.
it be. Yeah. And I have a question. What's the difference between healthcare and medicine?
Oh, it's such a great question. I think in terms of, okay, so when we take, this is a question that is, I mean, this is an answer that is purely from me and my observations and how I understand it. I think when we talk about like healthcare, we're talking about like a system, we're talking about the business, we're talking about the institution, like everything that kind of like impacts medicine versus like medicine is more like their providers. We're talking about like nursing, medical students. That's sort of what I think about, as opposed to like the system and institution of medicine, which could be like healthcare. That's how I think of it. But I think I could be wrong. Someone who's listening could
Oh, I
probably
know.
correct me. Please
Oh,
correct
I'm like,
me.
I don't know. I'm asking because I don't know. Because I've honestly always thought about that. Not always, but I've always been like, not always. I have thought before. What is the difference? So
Yeah.
healthcare being the system and medicine being the people is kind
I
of
think
what
so,
I.
like the work. Yeah, but I wouldn't say like if I say someone is like a healthcare consultant, I'm not going to say they're necessarily in medicine, but they're in healthcare, right? So I think that's sort of
Mm-hmm,
where there's a distinction there, but
Because I'm thinking about like a healthcare consultant could be a machine person that's trying to sell you a dialysis machine or something, which is
sure.
a part of the system. So you're right. Okay, cool. I'm picking up what you're putting down. All right. So what made you want to go to medical school? Like what was your journey to getting to medical school?
Yeah, so I'm not necessarily there yet, but in terms of like wanting to go to med school, I am a child of immigrants. And I'm open about the fact that I think it's really common for children of immigrants to feel this sort of like pressure to have a career where it's stable, um, and there's security in it. And I definitely think that I am the product of that, but that is not sustainable. To have a motivator to be someone else's external like dreams and hopes that they weren't able to fulfill. So I think I'm still trying to figure out like why I like medicine. And I actually do think it's kind of like what I said before. It's because I understand that people's health, especially in this country or even just like generally, people's health is at the center of so many different factors that I don't think people are thinking about. It's at the center of policy, it's at the center of law and government, it's also at the center of money. It's also at the center of these social norms and these cultural norms, that we often like butt heads with. I think in particular, like this country's, that is very evident, but it's also evident like globally. Religion, it's also the center of religion, like how we view a person's health, and bodily autonomy is a is impacted by all those different factors. And so I think that's sort of like what draws me to medicine, and being able to take care of someone who is unfortunately bearing the brunt of all those different factors on their body and on their health and wellness, is something that I want to be able to do. And so I think that's what draws me to medicine. I really want to make sure that, like I said, given that it is a very long and arduous journey, I really want to make sure that once I am in it, I'm in it with full abandon. And so that's part of the reason why I'm like taking a few gap years to make sure that like I know myself and I can pursue this full on. But yeah, I hope that answers your question. I think
No,
it
it does. No, it does. It
did.
does answer my question, but that's also interesting as I'm talking to you because, like, I didn't know you were taking gap years, right? I didn't know because that was
Oh,
going to be my next question. Like, how are applications? Because you're a senior, honey. That's
yeah.
that's. Ooh. But I think that is very interesting that you want to be so grounded because a lot of people aren't that that intentional, right? Like, you want to be so grounded in your why for yourself that when you do step foot on that medical school campus, you you are sure that you're doing it for yourself. And I think that it's interesting. First off, thank you for sharing your story, but it's interesting that you brought up your background of like being the child of immigrants and the pressure that comes with, because I also have a lot of friends that are children of immigrants and they feel that pressure that you are talking about, right? It is very clear that you have to be a doctor or engineer or a lawyer, and like you have to make a lot of money, because why else did your parents come here? Except to give you a better future, blah blah blah. So I thank you for your vulnerability in that, but also I commend you like for your intentionality of like figuring out before you get to medical school, before you spend all this money. Because I did have a friend who went to pharmacy school and realized he didn't want to be a pharmacist, So
It's common.
yeah, it's really common. So I commend you, for that. So my question is like, how did you get to the point where you were like, no, I need to take a few years off to figure this out? Like, where did that thought process originate?
Yeah, that's also a really good question. I I think in high school I was very much the um typical high achieving student. I worked hard. I got to where I am. Um, Obviously with like support of friends and family. But once I got to Penn, I was like, I'm tired. Granted, I'm also right, I'm coming out of COVID, so it's a little different for me and like for people my age going into college because of that. But yeah, I got to Penn and I was like, I'm tired. I can't envision myself like going to med school straight after, especially again, knowing how long it's going to be. Not necessarily med school, but like the process of residency and so forth. Um, so I was like, okay, I'm going to take at least one gap year. And also knowing like the classes that I would have to take in order to actually apply, like be able to apply my senior year, I was like, that's too quick for me. And then my dad got sick last summer and I was taking care of him and I was his primary caregiver. And this is actually kind of a funny story, not because my dad got sick, but it's funny because like I think that was I don't think let me back up. I think a lot of what med schools are looking for in terms of applicants, they're looking to make sure that you understand the system, they're looking to make sure that you know what it's like in medicine, like in the field. And that's why they always encouraging you to do volunteer hours and so forth, especially if you're doing gap years. I think that by being my dad's like primary caregiver, I was able to see the medical system and healthcare um, really truly for what it is. And I actually got really turned off by it. I think yeah, I know, I know, I know. In the book, I actually think I talk about like
Girl,
how it,
what?
let me explain. I know I think in the book, I talk about how it actually motivated me to want to be into medicine even more so. And I am a huge believer that like two things can be true at the same time. And so while I do think that like it's true, I also think that like, um, it's like hard. And I think also given the fact that I was coming at it from a perspective where like my dad was sick and I was the one who was taking care of him primarily, that obviously is going to influence like how I feel about medicine. Um, but I think with that experience, that told me, okay, I need to take a couple more years just to make sure that this is what I want to do. And I also think that um, that experience showed me the part of medicine that I don't necessarily want to be in, like necessarily want to be a part of. I think that I can say it wasn't necessarily a huge turnoff, but really more so was more informative and helping me understand, okay, like I may not really like inpatient, but like I
Yeah,
love outpatient. I love
yeah.
clinic. I love shadowing. Like I just shadowed like an OBGYN last week
Mm-hmm.
and that was so much fun. I mean, granted, it
Mm-hmm.
was a really good day, but I really like outpatient work. I like clinic work. I shadowed a family medicine doctor a couple days ago. So I think I'm by having these encounters with medicine and these experiences, I'm able to be more informative with like different parts of medicine that I would like to be a part of, even if that one experience was maybe not the most suitable experience to be
Yeah.
in when you're like 20.
Yeah. So I think that's it's interesting how experience can shape, because I don't think it changed, but shaped like the way you viewed the medical system and who you want to be within that system. So
Mm.
yeah, I think that's dope, actually. Like, I don't
Thanks.
know, Grace, you're cool. We're gonna be friends.
Thanks. Oh
But
my gosh.
but
Oh
I
my
think
gosh.
but I think that's cool though that you took this experience with your dad and it shaped the way you see even your future in medicine. And also it further solidified like I need to know why I want to do this. And it seems like you're also trying to figure out the how. Are you trying to figure out the how as well during this stage?
Yes, is the short answer.
Okay. And isn't it important for you to
Yeah,
know that?
it absolutely is. But at the same time, I'm recognizing that I don't need to know all the details. Sometimes it is just a leap of faith. Um, and it's a leap of faith fully, like it's like full abandon, right? I hope that's a term. But
Hmm.
yeah, I think it's important for me to know how, but it's also important for me to know like what's in my control and what's not in my control, and being able to just say, you know what, I did all that I could, and that's what's important.
Yeah, I think that's what I was going to ask. Like, is there something hindering you because you don't know the how? You know? Oh, my bad.
Is there something is there something hindering me because I don't
Because,
know the
like
how?
I
Yeah.
feel if I'm being honest, I think you're pretty sure you want to go to medical school.
Kind of think so too.
Yeah, I think you're just like trying to we'll talk about it offline.
Okay.
But yeah, like it sounds like because you're not talking about anything else, like at no point have you talked about like, well, I've thought about this or I thought about that. It's just been like, no, medical school, and you have a why. But anyway, that's interesting. We're gonna move on to your book and then we'll come back to this. So you co-authored, can you help me give a unlocking teen motivation in school and life? How did that come about? Because when you think
Yeah.
about all the things you talked about you care about, that's not on the list.
So
So,
true.
so how did book writing come about on the list?
Yeah, so my minor is journalism in
Mm,
college, and I did journalism in high school. And I actually, it's not actually like on my list, like writing a book is not on my in my bio, but um, or like on my, it wasn't actually like a life goal of mine to write a book. But I think in high school, I had always written stories as a journalist, as like a student journalist,
mhm.
and those stories evolved into columns and like op-eds about race and healthcare and education and medicine and all those sort of things. And I was like, I really like writing. And I want to continue doing journalistic writing in college. I think that was sort of like the process going into college. I've sort of think I've grown away from the more like traditional form of writing, like in terms of journalism. I really like writing and research and things of that nature. Um, but in terms of how I got to writing this book, I was just fortunate to be able to kind of be in the right place in the right time. And also, unfortunately, life works in a way where it really is about who you know.
Mhm.
And it just so happened to be that I met Becca Block, who is my co-author, and she's a PhD. She is a PhD. She was a professor. She's a tenured professor. And we met. She wanted to interview me, firstly about my experiences in high school and how I felt like I was able to have a lot more autonomy to be able to explore those topics of race, and education and race in medicine, versus at the time in early college. I didn't really feel like I had that autonomy and like motivation to be able to explore those topics. So she wanted to interview me as a result. And because she had this sort of like, uh, not necessarily vague, but she had like an idea about writing a book, but she wasn't quite there just yet about writing it and like interviewing students. And then she interviewed me and she was like, "You're so," she was like, "You're so cool, and you have a background in writing. Do you want to help like write the book?" And I was like nine, I was 18 at the time, so I was like,
Oh,
"Yeah,
wow.
sure." And so it's been 4 years in the making. We've been interviewing students across the country, and we've just been gathering stories, and we were able to curate them in this red book for anyone, any parents and teachers to read and understand what it's like to be a young person in this day and age, just trying to make their way and figure themselves out. um yeah, it's both in like the education like realm, but also
Yeah.
like socially. So
I love that. And also, everybody thinks you're cool, obviously, Grace.
thanks.
I was like, so
Thanks.
she thinks you're great, and I want to be your friend. So, hey, that's so cool.
Oh,
So I don't think I picked that up from the little excerpt that I read on Amazon, that it is a collection of stories. Because when you talked about journalism, I was like, I don't understand how this is connected to this book, but now it makes sense. It is a collection of stories. And do y'all bring out like, just tell us a little bit more, like, do you bring out like moments in the story and say, this is how you help your teenager? Like, how does it work?
yeah, that's a great question. We first start by asking like all of our interviewees, like, tell me about like a motivating experience that they had. And obviously, given like the topic of the book, um, excuse me, and also like the age ranges where we were looking at, um, excuse me, high school to early college.
Hmm.
So we asked them about like a motivating experience. And of course, because of the age range, they're going to be, their first thought is going to be school, and like their experiences in the classroom. And so um, we ask them about that. They tell them about like a teacher, they tell us about experience they had with a teacher, or um, with friends, or with maybe like a specific topic in the class, or even like with their parents. And then we start from there and we write. I hope that answers your question, but that's sort of like how we
Hmm.
start. And then, yes, we do weave in like bits and pieces about research here and there, but it really is about stories. And at the end of each chapter, we do have like some pieces of advice that are um, supported by the stories that are in that chapter.
Oh, I love that. So it's research backed suggestions.
Yeah, like we have citations, but it really, the focus is on the stories.
Oh,
And I
that is
think,
so cool.
yeah, I think like Becca and I think it's really cool that I was able to be invited onto like Becca's passion project, because it's,
Yeah.
started in Becca's brain. And it started with um I don't want to butcher the story, but it started with like someone in her close knit of friends who was also like an educator. And she was like teaching a class, and a high school student was like, "Can you help me give about high school? I really want to, but I can't." And so that is sort of like where the inspiration of our book comes from,
Hmm.
like the title of our book comes from, but it also is like the originator of like all of these stories, and that's sort of the originator of like the idea in Becca's head. But I was saying, like, I think I'm really grateful to have been a part of this project, because I think Becca and I, if you hear Becca talk about this book versus I talk about this book, it might be
Hmm.
slightly different. And I think that's kind of the point. Becca's obviously going to come from it from an educator, but also from like a parent. And this book is primarily for parents and educators, but for parents, versus I'm going to come at it from the perspective of like um, more emphasis on young people,
Yeah.
and like what it can do for young people. But I mean, that doesn't mean to say that like Becca is not focused on the young people. She absolutely is. But because of like who I am versus like who she is and her backgrounds, I think we talk about the book differently, but still complementary.
But I mean, I think that is the beauty of any work of art, right? Like we all can look at the same painting and pull out different colors that somebody else didn't see, or see a scene that someone else didn't see. So I think that's the beauty of art. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I also think it's cool that you were able to write a book that speaks to so many different audiences, right? It speaks to teachers, it speaks to students, it speaks to parents, and being able to navigate all three honestly is a feat within itself. You know, when we have these generational conversations, like earlier, you said you were Gen Z.
Yeah, I
Yeah, and like we talk
am.
about like how that, matters and all this stuff and like these conversations. My cousin is in a cusp of Gen Z and millennial. Like that two plus or minus 2 years on either side. He's
Mhm.
like in that. And even
Mhm.
in our conversations with his mom, who I think is a baby boomer, and like I'm like the middle between, like the baby boomer and like the Gen Z and like having these conversations is so interesting, and your book is allowing people to be that middleman, like that man between the teenager and the parent, or the teenager and the teacher. The book is the middleman for both groups, to be able to like be on common ground. And I think that speaks again to like your whole focus of like humanity, right? Like, and that's what you talked about earlier. It's like, I care about people is basically what you said. You didn't say it like that, but that's how I say it, so I don't know why.
Mhm.
But like,
Mhm.
that's what I tell people all the time. Like, I just care about people. I care that people, which is also broad, but I care that people succeed. I care, all these things. And um when you talked about the book, because I didn't understand how it fit into your story, if I'm being honest. I'm
Mhm.
like, how is this book is random,
It's a
but
random part of my resume for sure. Yeah.
it's not. I think our lives are a continuum. And I don't think it is, because you also told me you care about people and you care about humanity. And this book is a book that will help people and help humanity. So I don't think it's at random after you explained it.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. How long has it been out?
It was released July 9th,
Oh,
so
it
it's a
just
little
got
over a month.
released.
Yeah.
Oh, congratulations.
Thanks.
Now I really gotta buy. I mean, I was gonna buy it, but now I gotta really gotta buy it. Oh, that's exciting. So it's only been a month out. So have y'all heard feedback? Have you gotten like reviews on Amazon or anything?
Yeah, we've gotten reviews. There are reviews in the book, but that's also part of the reason, like, why we want to get the word out there. We would
Yeah.
love for people to give us a review on Amazon because I think it just incentivizes more people to buy it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think good feedback.
Oh,
I
that's
think I will
good.
say, yeah, I will say like Becca and I, we had a book talk. Today's We had it on Monday, and we were just it was a book talk at a local coffee shop.
Hmm.
And we had a lot of like engaging conversation. And what I will say about the book is that it was 4 years in the making, but there are obviously going to be holes in the stories, in the sense
Yeah.
of like some things that we just couldn't include. And those were some of the things that like people were bringing up in that conversation. So, um, be kind to us, for
Ah,
those who are like reading it or giving us reviews, but also just recognizing that like there are going to be some things that we might have missed. And if they're still like whoever is reading it, if they're still interested in like learning more about those holes, like we do have a podcast that I think is very much an extension of the topics of the book, a very much broad extension of the topics of the book. Yeah.
yeah. So tell us about the podcast. That's not in your bio.
Oh yeah. It's definitely um I guess I guess in the podcast sometimes. I guess featured in the podcast sometimes. But it's run by Becca and my co-author and a few people in her network who are like educators, or like have ties to the education system, and are also like
Pause.
parents. Yes.
You went out for a second. So start
Oh,
with, I'm just going to ask about the podcast again, and then you can start over. Okay.
okay.
All right. Okay. So yeah, you didn't tell us about the podcast. That's not in your bio. So tell us about the podcast.
Yeah, so I guest feature in the podcast a few times, but it's very much run by Becca and a few other people in her network who are educators and also parents. And they talk about a range of different topics. They interview some students from the book. We also try to keep anonymity for,
Hmm.
well, many of the students of the book, but there are a couple of students who have been uh, gracious and have been comfortable with having their identity revealed. So we do interview a couple students from the book. We interview me. We also interview a lot of other like educators who or like parents who have thoughts about the topics of the book, like how to guide your kid when
Mhm.
they're making decisions for themselves in terms of their career or figuring out like whether I want to do a gap year or whether college is the right choice for them, those sorts of things. Being able to just make sure that like we're uplifting young people in the way that they should be uplifted.
I love that. What's the name of it?
Can you help me give a same title as the podcast as
Uh,
a book? Yeah.
okay. Well, we'll link the podcast and the book in the
Yes.
show notes, so you'll be able to find them both.
And our social
Oh,
medias, please and thank you.
now and all of the social medias will be linked in the show notes of the podcast. Okay, that's cool. So there is a podcast, a book. You're doing all the things. You're doing all the things, and they're all, in my opinion, interconnected to caring about humanity. And I think again, going back to your original definition of what purpose is, and you were saying that it can be broad, right? Like that's one of the things you said, to say like it's not always centered on this one thing. And I think yours is definitely broad, but very linked to each other. So are there any other pursuits of like journalism that you want to continue doing?
At the moment, not now.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
I think, like I said earlier, that, my appreciation for journalism is always there, but in terms of my actually doing it, um, it will look different. I think I really like research and like writing from that perspective. And I was actually just thinking about it as you were talking that, yes, like my care and for humanity and people is broad, but I think it's different. Like for you, it's different versus for me, it's going to be like for
Hmm.
you, you said it's like you like studying like groups and
Hmm.
communities versus for me, I like doing that, but I also really like the interpersonal. I do like the
Hmm.
interpersonal interactions and what that means like in a broader perspective.
What does that mean in retrospect? I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, I know I do know I know the words that you are saying and what they
Yeah.
mean, but can you give me context of like, what does that mean to you?
Sure, sure. So like in terms of I like so if I can connect everything I'm doing, um, the book are very interpersonal stories, right? And yes, sometimes we link it to like systemic things, but it is very interpersonal. Um, the research I might be doing at school, I'm interviewing folks and it is very interpersonal. I'm talking about their experiences in healthcare, or I'm talking about their one on one experiences with their families and friends. That's interpersonal. Medicine, very interpersonal, especially being a doctor and a nurse, unless you have like other degrees, like an MBA or maybe like an MPH, you may not be in a position of power to make a lot of systemic changes. So medicine, like, as from a provider perspective, is a very interpersonal thing.
Mhm.
But like you said, like sociology might be more about like studying groups of people and yeah, groups of people and like communities. So that's sort of what I mean by like for me, I really like being in the middle. And like in the middle of the Venn diagram, but I do like leaning more towards like the interpersonal.
Yeah, so you like hearing the stories. Yeah, the stories of humanity. And that's interesting because it's like I am also like that. Like I like hearing the stories, but I always put the story in context of the society.
Oh yeah, sure.
Like I can't hear your story and not think, okay, immigrant parent, right? Like
Yeah.
not think like I can't, whatever other details you shared with me, I don't know how to separate them. So that's interesting because I always think about people in their context. Um, like for me, growing up in North Louisiana, what does that mean? Going to school in New Orleans, what does that mean? You know, the context of all those things. So I listen to people's stories, but I'm always adding context. And that's interesting. I mean, it's different, but it's just interesting how you listen to their stories like today, you know, like how can I
Mhm.
help them today? And I'm always like, but how did you get here? Like that's
So
always how I am.
yeah.
I'm always
Wait,
like,
actually,
huh?
yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying like I need the context. I always tell my classes like Context matters. Like you can't just
Yeah.
tell me. Uh, I believe, and one of the exercises I do in my classes, which we're getting off topic, but I'm gonna come back to you, I promise. One of the things that we talk about in my classes is how nothing is actually a personal trouble, how it's always a public issue. And that's actually an exercise that we do where they literally throw me something that feels like a personal issue, and I put it in the context of the world that we live in. So, like, they may say something like, my aunt got divorced. And you would think that that's an issue between two people, but it's actually a societal issue because we have normalized, right? We have in America, 50% of marriages end in divorce. So it's not, we don't second guess people getting a divorce anymore. So your personal trouble of me and my husband are having issues becomes well, in a greater context, it doesn't really matter. We can just get a divorce. Right. So that's what my brain does always. Of course, there are more societal things that has to do with divorce, but that's just a quick example of like how I see the world, like your interpersonal issue. I'm always thinking, well, of course you're sick because you live in a food desert, like, and you
Yeah,
don't have,
I do.
it's like, I'm not always thinking like this person is sick. How do I help them? I'm thinking this person is sick. How do I help their environment?
Interesting. Oh,
Yeah, like
that's
that's the way I see
interesting.
the world.
That's
That's the way I see the
interesting.
world. Like, oh, this
Ooh,
person and her
yeah.
and her husband are going through. How do I change the environment?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
That's so
that's how I think.
interesting. Wait, can I actually say something really quick to
Of
that?
course you can. This is your podcast episode.
Um, I think our brains do work very similarly, in the sense of like always bringing context. I am always sort of thinking that same way. I think in medicine, um, we should be thinking like that, but we are not thinking like that. We're
Hmm.
not always like bringing context to it. And I think that's what I was attempting to say, maybe not so clearly, that like in these sort of like two fields, I have to think more interpersonally with medicine. Even though in the back of my brain, I'm like, there are reasons why you came to our hospital or came to our clinic, and it's because of these systemic things. But like for sociology, I will always be thinking about the context. So I
You might
think
be a
our brains,
sociologist, Grace. I
I
keep
think I'm
telling
a
you.
sociologist at heart in
I
terms of like my
I
brain.
keep, I keep telling you, Grace. I saw it from the first 5 minutes. You might need to just be a medical social. No, I don't ever want you to change what you want to do in life. But I do think that because even when you just talked about caring about humanity, I was like, yeah, that's like a very um sociological concept within itself. Was like humanity versus caring about. I don't know how to what word I would use to talk about the individual that is like the humanity equivalent, but like
Mhm.
humanity in my head, I think about the collective,
Yeah,
and not the individual. But anyway, I'm totally joking. I'm not here to convince you to be a sociologist, but
both and, right?
sure,
Both and.
sure.
Can do both
Oh,
and.
yeah, you definitely can. I love that you stay open. That's like I really don't like to think generationally, but there are some things, and that is so generational. Gen Z generational. Like I can be all the things and like be successful in all of them. And usually y'all are. Like it is
Oh,
very amazing to see. I'm like, how did
fingers
you do
crossed.
that? A young lady I know that goes to Yale right now, like she just decided she danced in high school, quit like her junior or senior year, went to Yale, I think this is her second or third year, and just decided to like try out for the dance team. And we were like, you quit dance,
Yeah.
like how did you all of a sudden just decide? And like her mom was like, she didn't even tell me, like she just tried out and like made it, playing dancing, whatever.
She made the choice for
Yes,
herself. Yeah.
yes. And just the point I'm trying to make is just like the multifacetedness and being good at the things, right? Like the girl hadn't danced in 2 or 3 years at that point, and like
Mm,
well, on a team. I don't know what she was doing in her personal time, but on
mm,
a team, she hadn't danced in like 2 or 3 years. So for her to just pick that back up and be good at it and still be a grade school student and still, do all these things, I think that is like just a part of your generation that is dope. And I think that other people can tap into it. They just weren't taught to tap into it.
yeah.
And whereas not necessarily that y'all were taught, that y'all created that for yourselves. I believe that your generation taught us, which I mean, I think that way too, but are teaching the world that no, you can be all of those things. So I think that's dope. Sorry, I got off.
Yeah. Wait, no, not at all. I don't think it's like, I do think you're right about like it's something that we teach ourselves. And I think there are a lot of people because we are a generation um that has experienced so much. And so we did have to like make spaces and like make room for ourselves.
Mhm.
And if I am seeing like an activist being a student and an activist, like they're leading by example. And so I'm going to want to follow suit and do something similar.
Yeah, I think your generation is definitely the and, like not the but or like not the not, but the and. And I think that's dope to see that that students are creating and carving these spaces. And I think it's also interesting that you're creating and carving these spaces. Again, I'm thinking about context as a child of an immigrant, right?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
usually immigrant children are very like, I'm doing this, I'm sticking to this path. Deviating from that path is blasphemous, you
It's
know.
hard.
It's hard, So how do your parents fit into this? Like, are they supportive of the and? Do they look at you crazy and say that's just grace? Like, how does that work?
It's a little bit of both.
Okay.
It's a little bit of both. Uh, my parents are supportive. And this is something that I am sort of thinking about like personally as well and sort of been unpacking. My parents take different perspectives. I think my dad would love if I went to med school.
Hmm.
And that's sort of like where the extra pressure comes from. My mom wants me to be in healthcare, whatever that is, or actually not even like healthcare, but like medicine. She herself has noticed like a shortage of um doctors. So she thinks more broadly. She's like, if you can be an NP or whatever, you can be a
Hmm.
provider to some degree, then that is great because we are seeing a shortage of medical workers. So she thinks more broad. She thinks more broadly. My dad's like, be a doctor. But I think what is, like I said, I'm sort of unpacking it in my personal life
Yeah.
and trying to make sure that, like, again, this is something I
This is
want for
no
myself.
pressure. Yeah, this is a no pressure zone.
Yeah. But I think that's really what is nice about um I think what we advocate for, like even in the book, like going back to the book, is this sort of like guided freedom, like guided
Hmm.
framework of like being able to say that we have autonomy and we can make choices for ourselves because those are our choices.
Hmm.
But you can have guidance too. And that's sort of going back to that both ands, like these two things can coexist and be true at the same time.
Yeah, I
Um,
always I always picture my life as like for lack of better, this is not what I picture in my mind, but lack of better terms, it's like a bowling alley, right? And
okay.
like a bowling lane, right? So like there's this space that you can be free in, but there are clear edges,
Mm,
like there's a freedom from this place to this place, from this gutter to this gutter, but you don't want to end up in the gutter, and I think
yeah.
that is what our lives are kind of built upon, is this
Mm,
the what's the in between the gutters. You don't want to be in the gutter, but there's a lot of space there to make
mm,
choices and to explore and all those things. But I don't believe in freedom for freedom's sake. I don't
mm,
believe in that. I believe in freedom for a purpose, right? Like I am free to create, I'm free to write this book in whatever format makes sense to me. I'm free to apply to graduate school and however I want to apply, right? Like so not I'm free to do whatever I want to do and be a bum. No, you have direction. Just how you do it is the freedom. Does that make sense?
yeah, it does make
You're,
sense actually.
the way you're looking at me, I'm like, ooh, I don't know.
No, no, it makes sense. I mean, we could have a whole philosophical conversation about free will, and that's sort of like what was going on in my head.
Okay.
But yeah, no, yeah, I think that's really
Yeah, I
insightful.
just don't
I
I don't
agree.
believe in freedom for freedom's sake. I think that is dangerous. I think that is we guide people wrong when we're just like, you're free. Because I do believe I'm free. I believe that I'm a free person. I believe, but I also have a class to teach at 8 a.m. Right? Like, so there is a
True.
clear boundary that at 8 a.m. I have to be in front of some students and I have to say good morning. So I think that when we live in this space of like everybody's free to do whatever you want to do, then I don't have to show up for work, then I don't have to drive to work, then I don't have to, and I think that's unrealistic. And I think people anyway, we don't have to have a philosophical conversation about freedom right now. We're not going to do that. But Grace, thank you for being here today.
This is such a great
Yeah, it
conversation.
was such a great conversation. So, my next to last question is always if somebody were to walk up to you today, you're walking around campus and they're like, Grace, what is your purpose? How would you answer them?
To be kind to myself and to be kind to others.
Oh, I love that. Can that be my purpose? It's not my purpose, but can I take
It
that?
can
I'm
be. It
stealing
can be.
that.
You absolutely can. And you
I love
should.
that, to be kind to myself and to be kind to others. Okay, now I got a follow-up question because that's who I am as a person. Is that something you seek out to do, or is that something you live in? Because those are different.
Hmm. I don't know what it's like to live in. Like, what do you mean by live in?
So, like, and this might be another philosophical question, but like, I feel like some things are just me, and some
Ah,
things I have to seek out to do, right? Like, there are certain things that I have. Okay, so I talk about often on my personal channels how I used to struggle with anger. And so I used to have to seek peace, but now I don't have to seek peace. Like, peace is just who I am now. But when I was in high school and I was like crazy, what I'm saying? I had to seek peace. But now that I'm here in this space of life, I am peace. Does that make sense?
it does make sense. And I'm gonna say both.
Of course you are, Grace.
Sorry. Sorry, not sorry. But can't explain. Hmm, I think in the sort of culture that I grew up in a culture of like service, and servitude. And it was to a point where and this is again on something I'm unpacking as well, to a point where I forgot to be to express and show that same grace and kindness that I do to others to myself.
Mm.
And so that is something that I'm seeking. Like the being kind to myself, I think is something I'm seeking, but being kind to others is both, because I don't think that you can be kind to others if you're not doing it to yourself. Like, I don't think you can
Yeah,
do whatever you're doing to others if you're not doing that to yourself. Like,
yeah.
I can show empathy to others, but where's that coming from, right? Like, where's that
Mhm,
fuel coming from? How can I give out of an empty tank? I think
mhm,
that's the phrase. So I
mhm.
think it's a bit of both.
Okay, and that's okay. You could be an and. When I leave this episode, I'll be like, and. That's what I would be thinking about.
And
It can be both, and.
it's
That's
like a
absolutely.
yeah, it's like the acting when it's like improv.
Oh, yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
and
yeah. Yes,
yes, and
yes, yes. Yes, that's what it's like. That's what this whole episode is about. Living in, I might call it that, living in the and.
yeah,
Am I gonna remember that? Probably not. But
write it
thank
down.
yeah, I will write it down. Or when I re-listen to the episode, I'll be like, oh yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
But anyway, our last question is if people have listened to us, they've heard our conversation, what is the one thing you want them to leave here with?
I kind of think we touched on it like just now, like being open and being able to live in the and. Um, and perhaps uh giving yourself grace to be able to do those things.
I
I
love
think
that.
that's something. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you for being here, Grace. Also, fun fact, my middle name was supposed to be Grace, but my parents forgot, I guess, in the ruckamuck of having a child. And I told myself I would name my child Grace because that was supposed to be my name. But anyway, I know
It's a great name.
it is wonderful name. But thank you for being here, Grace. I thank you for sharing your story. I love to hear people's stories and Yeah, and connect them to the greater world as we saw. And thank you all
Mhm.
for listening to this episode of the Purpose Podcast with Dr. Jazz, where we journey to purpose together. Thank you again for Grace and being on our Collegiate episode, representing UPenn. She's just so calm about it. Uh, and I'll see y'all in 2 weeks. Bye.